Hi everyone, thanks for joining us this morning. We're just going to wait a few minutes for some more people to join. So we'll start in about 2 minutes time. Wish I had some elevator music or something to keep you entertained during the period, but we'll just sit here in a nice awkward silence while we wait for people to roll in, and then we'll get going for the session today. Hi to those that are just joining. We're just going to leave it 1 more minute. There's a stream of people rolling in at the moment. 1 more minute and we'll kick off. Okay, perfect. We're gonna make a start now. So, thanks so much for joining us for this session. Really happy to be here with Adam Taylor. I'll let him introduce himself and Google Marketing Platform. From my side, my name is Matt Andrew. I'm one of the partners here at Ekimetrics. Ekimetrics is a leading data science industrialization firm. We've been working in the space for 16 years, where we really focus on reconciling companies' financial KPIs with non-financial KPIs like brand performance, customer performance, or even sustainability goals, to make sure that you're really building a business that's heading into the sustainable future and sustainable business practices over that time. Adam, go for it.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you very much for having me, and thanks to the Ekimetrics team. Good morning, everybody. I'm Adam Taylor. I'm the privacy lead for Google Marketing Platform in the UK. I've worked at Google for a little over 6 years, the last 3 of which have been kind of dedicated or entrenched in the world of data privacy. I help our sellers, our customers, and our agencies and partners understand the privacy landscape and then how ultimately our technology and services can support.
Great. Thank you. So today what we're going to cover is 3 parts to the agenda. So we're going to first of all have a look at some of the research that Adam, you've been doing with around how the consumer's perception of privacy and how privacy experiences impact consumers and audiences across digital platforms. We're going to go into how privacy first brands and how they react to the privacy environment creates opportunities in the ads and performance space. And then part 3, we'll see how can brands and advertisers react to some of the changes that are coming to make sure that their measurement program is really fit for purpose and leading them into long-term success from a brand steering perspective. So maybe to start, you can take us a bit more through some of the research that you've been doing, Adam, with looking into privacy and what consumers are looking for.
Yeah, of course. So naturally over the last few years, we've seen increases in almost all search terms in relation to online privacy or manage my privacy, data privacy, that type of thing. And search is a fantastic indicator for helping us understand whether consumers are interested in a topic and are looking to find out more. And it was that kind of curiosity and that trend and that increase that made us kind of think that this was an area that we really needed to research a little bit further. So in 2021, we launched our first study with Ipsos, kind of a global research partner of ours. It was specifically focused in Europe, and it was looking at studying 7,000 respondents and their feelings and preferences when it came to online privacy and the way that they share data with brands. It kind of threw up a few really interesting stats, but the kind of the majority thing from that was that the more you make users feel like they're in control of the data that they share, the more they are willing to kind of further that relationship with you, and the more that will ultimately lead to further business outcomes. So that was a really interesting kind of first build, and that privacy by design is available on the Think with Google blog. And then this year, or for the last 12 months, we actually expanded that survey. So we took that kind of idea of feeling of control and how, that was something that was really kind of paramount to the users that we surveyed, and thought, how do we build on that? How do we start unpicking that a little bit further? So Privacy by Design 2.0, I wasn't working on the title, but there is something in that. But I think that one just expanded, and we saw then that the sample size grew to 20,000. It was respondents from 5 different European markets. So it was the UK, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Sweden, and across 5 industry verticals, which were retail, travel, tech, telco, and FMCG. And essentially, the survey was there to present the respondents with a set of different scenarios when it comes to kind of data privacy and the way that a brand would interact with them when it came to kind of displaying their privacy choices. And then we asked a series of questions based on that to uncover a little bit of insight. And those 4 groups were, in the first group, if we divide them kind of 25, 25, 25, we had one group that were exposed to an incredibly negative scenario. So think your data breach, think you've been contacted by a brand that you've shared data with, and they've told you that, unfortunately, we've been hacked, there's been a loss of data, and your personal information, including financial information, is at risk. The second group were exposed to a more neutral message. So think a company that is doing almost the bare minimum when it comes to kind of responding to regulation. So there's cookie notices on the website, they're slightly confusing in terms of the language that's used, and there are a number of terms and conditions that are signed that a user would have to go through, and it's not particularly clear. The third one was a positive experience. So how do they make that experience really clear to the user, really transparent, give them the granularity and the control and the transparency, and making sure that they can choose what it is that they want to commit to. And then the last one built on that positive experience by adding a monetary incentive. So if you provide this information, we will add a 10% discount or whatever it might be. And the results were actually really interesting. I think the next slide, we've kind of detailed down a few of the key findings here. And we were talking about this in the kind of the build up to the call. There's some interesting stats that have been thrown up here. Oh, we've made fantastic. So I think, yeah, the first one looked, so what we were expecting to see more or less was that, for that first group where, a hack had happened or there was a really negative privacy experience, we were expecting that to be the least trusting set of consumers that were responding, and that certainly was the case. But actually, the group that were in the second, the more neutral, where it was just meeting the bare minimum in terms of requirements, that group were almost reacting as unfavorably as the ones that had been exposed to a data breach. So investing in just the bare minimum is actually something that longer term probably won't play out for successful businesses. So it's kind of a really interesting kind of thought provoker there, that doing the bare minimum and just having something that kind of gets you by from a regulatory perspective isn't quite what the user is really looking for. And then, as it says there, the impact is almost as severe as that as a data breach. But then from a kind of a positive angle, you would expect the group that had the positive experience plus the monetary incentive to be the group that really kind of responded the most favorably. But in fact, the addition of that monetary incentive was actually counterintuitive. So it didn't actually show up in the results that added any kind of marginal gain for the brands that were working in that space. So it shows that there was a little bit of perhaps, conflation between the idea of personal data and monetary gain. People felt a little bit suspicious in some of the results. And ultimately, this research has kind of provided us with some really interesting talking points to take to advertisers to make them think not just about how the marketing impact of privacy is really being felt in the organization, but how they can start investing in data privacy as well as data security. And I think there's some really interesting things that can come out from that.
Yeah, and this type of research is really powerful, right? Because I think a lot of advertisers, a lot of brands, companies facing regulation change and deprecation of cookies and almost kind of approaching it as something to navigate around or steer through. But actually what a lot of this research shows is that it can be an opportunity to differentiate in a new environment, and that for brands that lean into a privacy first experience and are giving consumers and audiences kind of the control and the visibility of how privacy is being respected, it can have a really positive effect for those brands that kind of lean into that and make it a change and a positive change, rather than just something to kind of steer around as much as possible.
Yeah, exactly that. And we found that, in the short time that this research has been published, and I'm sure it'll be sent around afterwards, and you can find it on the Think with Google blog, but we found that a lot of marketers are actually using this as like an impetus for a discussion with other areas of their business. So, perhaps going to legal teams or, kind of data privacy teams with a kind of a conversation about cookies and kind of the downstream impact of some of these changes was quite tough, because we live in a very kind of different world and a different space to a lot of those different areas of a business. So taking something which feels a bit more holistic is a really interesting way of kind of leveling up that conversation. So it's definitely something that we're seeing have a really positive impact.
No, completely. No, really powerful. And I think one of the things that also drives this or comes out as something impactful is that a lot of people are approaching it as a regulation change and something that has to be, it's clearly something that has to be done because of the regulation changing. But what's powerful about this research and what you're doing across the different kind of Google businesses from Chrome to ads is saying that if you are building something that's for consumers and respects their privacy, then actually you can have really positive impact. And overall, especially when we talk about the ads ecosystem and some of the negative experiences that have built up over time because of the kind of prevalence of pop-ups and bad practices that I know the Google Ads team have been pushing against for a long time and saying these aren't good practices in terms of respecting the way that consumers want to use the web. Actually seeing third-party cookie deprecation as just a regulation change is not right, really. It's about an interpretation of regulation change, but ultimately it's about making a better web experience for consumers at the end of the day.
Exactly that. And like we're naturally as a business, our commitment to the ad funded open web is out there, is public. It's something that we talk about quite frequently, and we really do believe that good advertising powers good content, which makes for great experiences for users. And there is no regulation, as far as I'm aware, that is sweepingly telling tech companies to remove third-party identifiers or ad identifiers. There's nothing that is making that law. But I think we're starting to see these businesses understand what their users almost expect and want from them based on things like we said there with that research. And you've seen a couple of examples where some of those companies have opted for a very kind of like cut and dry approach, and we've seen that move happen and it's already there. Whereas our Chrome and Android teams that work separately to the ad side of our business have taken an approach where they're trying to create alternatives, and they're trying to create something that maintains that infrastructure and ability for the open web to continue to be funded by relevant advertising. And again, I think that will be, as we move into 2023 and more realistically 2024 for the rollout, it'll be a really interesting time for brands.
No, perfect. I'm just going to take a brief pause at this moment to say there are questions that are kind of coming into the question box. We will answer kind of any Q&A at the end of this. We'll go through the questions that are coming in. We'll have some time at the end to go through those, and then the Eki team are in the background helping out if you've got any technical questions and stuff on the Livestorm app itself. But to kind of build from this, I think one of the things that we've seen as well is that last year and even the kind of first half of this year was mostly about the theory of what should brands prepare for. And also for a lot of people, it was kind of a bit unexpected or unknown exactly what the changes that were going to come into place would actually result in. But much more now, we're seeing the first elements of cookie deprecation, but also not just cookies, but cross-platform kind of loss of ability to attribute with some of the changes in iOS, for example. And we're starting to see what the real impact on brands is in practice as these changes come into play. And one of the biggest is this kind of loss of visibility in terms of real kind of conversion outcomes when some of those things are coming out to play, and ultimately kind of a measurement black hole to fill in some way. For attribution heavy brands, for brands that are very much focused on direct response, where that loss of visibility is really impairing their ability to optimize and understand what's working for them, we've actually seen that reduce advertising budgets, so that the budgets are available. Brands have money that they want and need to spend to kind of keep increasing conversions or downloads or sign-ups and registrations, but just that lack of kind of ability to really steer is something that's affecting the willingness to spend, because they want to make sure it's actually going in the right places. And ultimately, there's been a lot of kind of talk about measurement alternative solutions, and there's for sure a need for more guidance of how to approach some of the changes in measurement that could support a shift from a purely attribution-focused measurement framework into something which is a bit more holistic, a bit more complete, and about triangulating through some different methods to make sure you've got a good balance between the short-term direct response measurement, but also what's driving a longer-term brand response overall.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, we're facing ultimately exactly the same thing here, right? And having conversations across each of these areas. And I think, we're a US-based company with predominant engineers based in California, and working on our product development. And often from our side in Europe and across the rest of the world, we often look to the US for kind of guidance when it comes to our product and our advancements. But increasingly, we're starting to see the West look east, as it were, to Europe, and we really are the hotbed for privacy. And where things like the browser changes obviously impact tech companies and brands globally, affirmative consent, or the kind of the stricter approach to kind of consent in Europe, really means that we've been at the forefront of some of these more difficult conversations to start with. So we're certainly kind of innovating in that space, I think, and seeing certain things around. You mentioned there, like visibility loss. How do we build and how do we adapt products that we've got that can actually look to perhaps solve some of the challenges for customers and create that solid foundation? But yeah, certainly an acute challenge that we face, perhaps more so in Europe and in areas where that consent requirement is starting to become a little bit more strict, and it's definitely informing the way that products are evolving at Google.
Yep, no, definitely. And I think that's one of the benefits of the integrated platforms. So the likes of Google, the likes of Meta, those big kind of integrated ecosystems with multiple ads products, or where you've got privacy solutions and privacy enhancing technologies that are already being developed or already released in certain cases to offer a part of that solution in terms of some of that missing visibility. So especially the kind of scale and ability to create measurement opportunities with kind of more of an attribution solution directly within that integrated platform is something that can be really powerful to still steer direct responses. And especially the amount of support that I know that yourselves and a lot of other players in the space are offering brands as they navigate how best to kind of work with them, the technical changes that are required, because a lot of these things that we're talking about as we shift from pixels that are pretty easy to integrate into a web page, or different elements of a web page, into things like APIs instead, where you need slightly different skill sets to actually enable the measurement solutions and the visibility of conversion events that are happening. But overall, we still really strongly feel that attribution in and of itself and attribution within the integrated platforms isn't the holy grail overall. And I, you talk about it in the Google team yourselves in terms of the triangulation of different approaches. And one of the things that we do really see on our side is that an over-reliance on attribution, or just that direct response approach, is something that will lead to incomplete measurement programs and ultimately not steering for the best kind of long-term impacts that you could get from your advertising overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, just on that, just to kind of add to it, I think, our job is not to provide the complete end-to-end. Our job is to kind of help advertisers, measure and manage the media they spend on Google Media through the products that we can offer. And then more broadly across the rest of the web and across the rest of digital touchpoints with the Google Marketing Platform. But ultimately, we're aware that that's a piece of a puzzle that has to be thought about in kind of a much broader scale. So, we have to make sure that the data that we can kind of create for a brand then, works in the formats of the media mix modeling and the econometric studies that, ultimately inform a kind of a higher level, really, how marketing is developed across a brand. And, it's an area that we're investing really heavily in, both in terms of product and in terms of skill set and resource, and, people that can support with that. And 100% agree that, those in-platform offers, whilst they're there to support day-to-day trading and day-to-day, kind of measurement and monitoring of campaigns, they ultimately feed into a longer term goal of making sure that overall investment is working efficiently.
No, completely, and I think that's exactly the point of this at this point on the screen now, is that the whole kind of ecosystem of drivers of consumer behavior is something that's really critical to understand, and especially for many advertisers that focus on really narrowly thinking about, I do this activity and it drives this immediate response. Sometimes that ecosystem of drivers goes unnoticed or missed out, and actually the role that it plays in interacting with other types of media, other types of advertising, how external factors on non-tracked media channels, like in the offline space, are kind of interacting to drive efficiency and performance in the digital world, is something that we really think is critical to make sure that you're driving sustainable long-term business results, rather than just always having to pump money into short-term outcomes. And one of the other kind of potential elements for this, and this is really where some of the impact of the coming changes is still to be felt, is the potential decline in the size of most third-party audiences, and how some of the bigger kind of audience targeting platforms and networks are integrating and enabling the measurement, the targeting approaches that they have through some of the privacy secure options that are coming out into the market. And I know we're going to talk about Privacy Sandbox in a bit from Google, but that potentially can lead to a decline in the size of third-party audiences that are available, and it will increase the quality in terms of the kind of real knowing that you've got kind of consumer consent, and knowing you've got willingness to be targeted and have personalized experiences. But that audience shrinking means that the role of, especially programmatic, and getting very broad reach and kind of following up on triggers for behavior that you've seen through some of the tagging on different parts of the consumer journey on digital, for example, are going to change in scale. One of the really important things is that move to first and second party data, prioritizing that quality over quantity, and ultimately we'll talk about bringing some of that contextual craft back into marketing, which is something really important to bring into place. But it's also critical at this point, I guess, to highlight that when we talk about cookies and the deprecation of cookies, we are talking about third-party cookies here, and that experience of knowing who a user is on your site, on your own kind of platforms, and being able to understand how they move about is still something that is there. First-party cookies aren't disappearing, and it's more about how you're using that first-party data and integrating it in a privacy-safe way with some of the other kind of solutions that exist from the likes of Google, from Meta, from the big advertising networks, is what's going to really make brands successful as we navigate into this kind of privacy-first world.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, most of the narratives from every kind of tech company and every platform over the last couple of years have been about this shift to first-party data, and for Google, we see that as kind of twofold. One, it's a foundation in knowing what works for you from a measurement perspective. So onboarding and bringing data sets into media buying platforms that you're actually then, pointing a search platform or a display and video platform at the right objective for your business, and that is crucial. And most cases, still, we're not seeing that every single brand has got that point right. We're still optimizing towards site events or pixel fires or things that are, are relatively kind of, a step beyond what really creates business value. So that's one part of first party data. And then it's this view of kind of almost the structured, CRM style lists of kind of known consumer records where you have the consent, and how that can feed in to create kind of, new marketing strategies, whether that's via, one-to-one remessaging or kind of upselling to a particular audience segment, or, finding people who have similar attributes. And our products and platforms need to evolve to support that in a better way. You come to Google to use our products and services, for kind of usability, but also, for access in many cases to what is referred to here as second-party data. So the Google signed-in user space. So users that we have a one-to-one relationship with through our consumer products. They provide, information to us about things they like, things they don't like. I think we'll touch on that a bit later on. But that then really is fueling marketing opportunities. But then I just want to touch on that decline in the size of most third-party audiences. And I think, any kind of buyer out here who's on this call right now who would be thinking about, or has been buying inventory across Safari, Firefox, any of the other browsers for the last few years, would have no doubt seen a decrease in, the size and the ability to target individuals in those environments in certain circumstances. I think, where there's a fear in, kind of the changes that are upcoming in Chrome and Android and kind of, further into the rollout of that deprecation, there is a fear that those audiences decrease. Whereas, in fact, I think it does actually create a bit of an opportunity for those tech companies and those audience companies to reinvent the way that they are currently structuring that product and that offering. So Sandbox isn't there to completely remove the ability to target. In fact, it's there just to reinvent it. It's there to offer an alternate. And that's a really important point. So, it isn't the expectation that third-party audiences, completely fall off a cliff by the time that we get to 2024. It's that instead they're structured and they're built in a way which preserves the privacy of the individual user and fuels that into ad tech in a different way. And I think that's an important point to kind of note there.
No, definitely. And I think we'll kind of come on to this as well, because I think part of this is still a journey into a bit of the unknown. There's lots of businesses working in lots of different types of technology and types of approach that can make sure that there is still the ability to measure, to optimize, and to make sure that you can access kind of consenting or aggregated audiences in a way that means that you're still kind of targeting in a richer way. I guess the kind of biggest effects are yet to be seen. Exactly, kind of when Chrome is obviously a leading browser, and I know you're not in the Chrome team, but the changes are coming, and I think we'll talk about Privacy Sandbox or My Ad Center and the kind of rollout of that alongside the deprecation of cookies in Chrome, third-party cookies in Chrome. But for sure, I think one of the themes we really want people to take away from this session is that there's a bit of a false sense of security in terms of the timeline shifting back, and actually what the research is showing that you presented at the very beginning, and the case study, one of the case studies we've got at the end as well, is that for brands that actually lean in and are adopting privacy first approaches sooner in market and showing consumers that they're respecting that, it has a positive impact on those consumers and can really actually drive brand results for you as well. And so one of the things that is important for us is also not just thinking about how to navigate the potential downsides or negative impacts that could come from changes in this space, but also the new opportunities that emerge for brands. For a lot of brands that were focused on direct response or attribution approaches to understanding performance, it is an opportunity to reduce the dependency on one tool, which is very powerful for the kind of use case that it covers. But actually to allow you to step back and take a holistic vision of measurement, to use a series of tools that when combined or triangulated together actually help you really navigate between the longer term brand effects and the shorter term kind of real direct response and campaign performance that you want to measure. The other is driving customer centricity and really understanding how the mix of kind of broad and narrow targeting can affect consumers through their journey through to purchase, and ultimately achieving results that understand the interoperability or the connected nature of media campaigns and the different channels that are in use, and ultimately steering towards the best outcomes overall and the most effective and efficient way of driving spend. And finally, one of the big opportunities that we see is is more a kind of mindset shift as well that can come from the space, is shifting from a target-centered view of advertising to a context-first view. And some of these first-party data sets where you're really talking about quality audiences that have specific kind of themes around them, such as in the gaming space or movies or in music or all of these things, cars, for example, as other big kind of media platforms that are really giving access to rich kind of contextual audiences, means that instead of potentially just following individuals around the web wherever they go, that you're actually going to have advertising experiences that are centered around the right context for what that user is actually browsing at that time, and for the journey that they're going through on the web. And that can be a really powerful way to drive a positive perception of digital advertising, rather than something that's intrusive. And it has obviously seen a rise in kind of the use of ad blockers over the last years as well, because of some of those kind of not best practice actions that have been taken. And I know this is, Adam, this is one of the things that came out for you in terms of 3 key takeaways when it comes to the privacy and the use of the privacy technologies that come from the research. But it's also a really great way to think about responsible marketing for a brand overall. And if you can make your advertising meaningful and part of an enhancing part of a consumer journey, if you can make it memorable and something that stands out for them, and if you can make it manageable and know that the audience and the consumer has the power to say what they're happy to receive in a personalized way or not, then ultimately you're going to be driving stronger responses for yourself overall. But maybe you can talk a bit about what this also means for you from the privacy and the implementation of privacy first technologies as well.
Yeah, of course. I think you're right. Like, this comes from that Ipsos piece, and I quite like it as like that framework. It's something that kind of, as we said, like can transcend across a horizontal in a business. So you can take this to different areas, not just marketing, and kind of make it feel like it fits, and it's something that can be, used to hopefully kind of spur and create action. And what I always like to think about here is that sometimes when we're talking to our B2B audience, right, at Google, which is the advertising industry and the tech industry, we have these narratives, and we have these stories about how we're approaching kind of the changes from like a tech angle, and some of the products that you can implement, features you can implement. But we have to kind of take a little step back here and think that we're a B2C brand as well, right? Quite heavily. We have billions of users that sign into our products on a day-to-day basis, that make the most of search and YouTube, Gmail, whatever it might be. And we're really trying to take this meaningful, memorable, manageable into the way that is working. And I think if you skip on, an example of that has been the recent launch of the My Ad Center. So anyone who is on the call who's a Google user can go to their Google tab or Discover feed, whatever it will be, search for My Ad Center, and then you'll actually be able to go into the most granular level of control that we've ever offered when it comes to personalized advertising across Google's owned and operated media. So you're able to tell us and kind of confirm things around demographics, around interests, around hobbies, around topics that you're particularly interested in or want to receive ads on. So it's trying to create this transparency, this choice, this control that can land with a user and make them feel like ads are actually part of like a personal content service, more or less. And this kind of like execution has been super powerful in the last, it's only been released for a few months. We've kind of built on the My Ad settings, which was a similar version of this, but this is really trying to almost productize in a way, the way that we would talk to customers and give them that ability to kind of adapt and control. And this is one kind of consumer facing execution of that. And I'd imagine that the rollout for something like a privacy sandbox won't be called privacy sandbox when it comes to a user, and when it sits in front of a consumer on their browser, they're not going to see terms about APIs and topics and pledge. Instead, they're going to know, how do I control what data is shared? How do I feel like I'm in control of that experience? So I really think that's a good example, and something that often is kind of not thought about perhaps as much in this case, that we have to still deliver that experience for our consumers as well.
No, definitely. And so from an ad solution perspective, I know there's a few kind of pillars to that overall approach that you are taking as a business. So maybe talk us through a bit around those different pillars and how they're going to impact advertisers in the next month, years.
Of course, yeah. So if My Ad Center and Sandbox feel like they're kind of B2C, this is certainly the B2B story that we're talking to advertisers and marketers about. And it's no surprise that it starts in that kind of idea of first party data and infrastructure. And often, to kind of progress and be forward thinking in privacy and in advertising, we actually have to go back. So we have to go back to basics a little bit. Let's go back to tagging. Let's go back to infrastructure. Let's make sure that we've got good coverage, that we're doing the right things by way of collecting data in a consented and responsible way. So if advertisers come to us with a big media, meaty media challenge, and they want to understand the effectiveness of ads either on YouTube or elsewhere in the web, the first thing that we're always going to go back to is, are you collecting the right information? Do you have the right data to really fuel that study or that experiment or that model with the correct data? So a huge part of our team's role is to kind of go out and build that infrastructure and support on that infrastructure. Because ultimately then the second point here, which is building machine learning based modeling and automation, it's no good having that layer if you're not optimizing towards, or if you're not building towards the right thing or the right value for a customer. So modeling and automation are only as good as the data that is fed into them to start with. So it's a really important part of like building that story for an advertiser. And I think when we kind of step that back a few layers, people really see it and actually then create a bit of a clearer action plan. And then on the last point here, so privacy preserving technologies, and we say here including the privacy sandbox. So the Google Ads and GMP rollout is not kind of predicated entirely on privacy sandbox. That will be one input into a product roadmap that will evolve over time. And we're testing new technologies all the time that are looking to enhance users' privacy. So whether it's new solutions that match data from a publisher with an advertiser in a new clean room, or the new pair product that was released, or all the way down into actually integrating with one of the privacy sandbox APIs. So we're trying to really, as it says there, take that multi-pillared approach and support advertisers through each of those different areas. So that ultimately then when they are coming to companies like yourself at Ekimetrics, they're coming with complete data sets and a really good understanding of what they want to get from experiments and longer term studies into media efficiency.
No, exactly. And I think that's a good chance to say we've been talking a lot about how you can ensure that in a privacy safe way you're getting access to that data that allows you to understand conversion in a more kind of attribution type environment. But one of the things that we're also seeing in the short and midterm is the role of marketing mix optimization as a whole in the kind of new cookieless world that's coming through. And there's a lot of direct response players that are coming into a new type of measurement. So marketing mix measurement, or econometrics based studies overall. And what we're really looking at is, from our perspective as Ekimetrics, when we talk about marketing mix optimization, it's how you can bring in much quicker cadence to your models, so that you're able to approach kind of real-time analytics and steer stuff as it's live, to get much deeper into the granularity of the different types of channels, sub-channels, platforms, formats that you're using. And ultimately, a lot of these advertisers are really looking for how it can be an automated approach to delivery, and to make sure that those rapid insights are being diffused across the business in ways that they're used to working with very kind of platform and product-enabled attribution solutions in the past. And so for us, this kind of marketing mix optimization approach can provide a holistic environment in which to measure in that cookieless world, like the anchoring kind of layer that lets you triangulate between a number of different solutions within that. So MMM or econometrics is an approach that allows you to steer some of those longer term brand effects, but also to understand the role that market factors or external factors have on the changing business results. But when matched or used together with attribution, to make sure that you can get to really granular decisions, to real-time planning, and to steering stuff as it's live in market, and also ultimately to test and control for those new things that are coming out. So getting to causal impacts through experiments where you're limited to very specific things that you're testing, but it's stuff that you really want to either see that's new in market and doesn't have a scale yet, and you want to understand if it's something to go further with, or if it's something that is difficult to measure through other solutions for a number of reasons. So brand search terms is one of those things, for example, where test and control and experiments can be really useful to get that kind of gold standard of measurement. And ultimately, when you triangulate those things together, you start being able to have this integrating layer that gives you a high ROI, high efficiency, sustainable foundations to a budget or an advertising plan in a year. able to steer across certain channels, especially in the digital space or within those integrated platforms, using attribution to get that flexible pool of budget and channels you can work around for tactical reactivity, and then testing for continuous innovation, because the really important thing in talking about optimization versus measurement is that we really want to be forwards looking and to help brands make sure that they're able to test and learn and bring new approaches into market, and do that with the confidence that they understand exactly the impacts that's going to have with them. And so just to finish off before we go into some of the questions, a few kind of examples from both of us in terms of how some of these different elements come into play. So one from the quick service restaurant industry, very large business, 7 different brands operating in the casual dining and QSR space, 30,000 restaurants across 70 global markets. Really, they wanted to look at how they increased digital presence. Like, how do you confidently move into digital and know that it's having a strong impact overall? And so we built alongside them a holistic measurement approach, so monthly monitoring of the overall ROI, integration of the readily available attribution data that they had from kind of partnered media integrated platforms, and ultimately really looking at the impact metrics then, because most of what we're talking about isn't digital conversions, it's going to be foot traffic into restaurants and ultimately the number of tickets that they're serving. And with this framework in place, actually, it gave them the confidence to think about very rapid growth in digital investment. So 300% growth in the amount that they were spending in digital platforms, which ultimately led to a lot more media diversification. And I'm a big proponent of multi-channel activity as a way to really drive overall performance. There's a lot of other research out there that shows, more channels come with greater success overall. But then the ability to optimally allocate that and think about the right seasonal phasing was something really, really important there. And then within that framework, again, the ability to test something new. So they released a mobile app for one of their brands, and actually having the first measurement of understanding the impact of that app within the wider ecosystem of everything they're doing was a really important way of thinking about the triangulation of those different approaches and how it can cover very different kind of needs and use cases within the business.
I really like this one, Matt, just because I think if you just flick back a second,
yeah, of course,
there's been, maybe historically there, perhaps in some of the kind of like the core digital platform space, there has been a hesitance to really lean into this type of measurement and this type of study really into the efficiency and the effectiveness of media. But really your outcomes there in the first bullet point shows you the value of really leaning into it and providing accurate, good quality data into those models that will actually fuel longer term investment. And I think that's certainly something I've seen over the the time that I've been at Google. The kind of the handoff between infrastructure and kind of advanced measurement has got a lot better, and we're starting to see that really kind of play back in terms of the types of conversations that we're having with customers about growing media investment, even in challenging economic environments like we're in at the minute.
Yeah, no, and we haven't talked about it so much, but that change in skill set that's required for those measurement solutions to be successful, and the infrastructure that sits behind that is really interesting as well. The role of data engineering and architecture within the whole measurement space is becoming much more critical to make that happen. And actually, this is one of the things for this second case study in the beauty space, where purely because of the scale, that 25 plus brands, 150 global markets, and a huge business in terms of $16 billion of turnover. The build of this kind of triangulated measurement framework has to come with platform and tools as a way to really make it something that you can scale across that size of business. And so when we look at some of the gains that can be made from triangulating across these different approaches, tangible kind of value gain in terms of $25 million and ultimately the kind of project ROI really paying for itself many times over in terms of the type of impact you're getting. But I'm going to leave the last case study to you, Adam, in terms of what it really means when you actually lean into privacy first.
Yeah, so we're often tasked with the kind of as you said, like the foundational layers, right? How do we make sure that we're collecting and we're getting things kind of into those further down the line models that you just touched on there? And this is an example that we have from an online multi-category clothing retailer who have always been kind of super advanced users of our technology and have always looked to be kind of at the forefront of that, and came to us saying that they started noticing declines in traffic. They were seeing kind of week on week, month on month declines, just in terms of what they were observing on their website based on some of the changes that they were seeing in the ecosystem. So firstly, in certain browser types, they were seeing that decline. And then, when they moved to a different consent mechanism, a different consent model, they started seeing that as well impact kind of the material results that marketing was proving in those platforms. So we work with them on a couple of different approaches, but really to go back to basics, as I said, so to look forward, to have to kind of start by going backwards, and the idea of a privacy preserving foundation. So setting site-wide tagging, making sure that you kind of accurately reflecting users' consent status in the data that you're collecting, and then adopting a couple of those more privacy forward measurement solutions that we've got. So consent mode, a kind of an adaptation to our tag products that communicate that consent status back to Google. So when we see that a user hasn't consented, we respect that consent decision and don't build user profiles and target them elsewhere, but we are able to understand if they've been exposed to an ad and have converted, so we can attribute that back to marketing. And then enhanced conversions, which is a different approach from a product perspective, but where if you're collecting PII or certain types of information on checkout or at the point of purchase, we're able to hash that information when a user consents to it and match that hashed information back to any ad that they've been delivered on Google's owned and operated media. So for advertisers who use YouTube and search quite heavily, it's a really interesting product that is starting to kind of really pick up traction. And you can see there, right? So the bottom two bullet points, probably the most important there, that conversion uplift and conversion recovery are kind of the metrics that we really look for. So how do we make sure that, conversions that were previously going unattributed to marketing in our platforms and elsewhere are actually being reflected in the correct way? And enhanced conversions able to do that for YouTube, and consent mode does that more broadly across a kind of a media mix. So a kind of a really forward-leaning customer that we work with, who are now really starting to engage with us on actually then building that kind of more first-party data elements on top of that. So how do they bring CRM lists? How do they bring kind of other data points in so that they're bidding towards the correct way? So a really useful example here of kind of practically where to start.
No, great. And I think we're gonna follow up on this one pretty quickly as we go into the Q&A with some of the questions we've already received. But just to say thanks to everyone that has been with us so far through the session. If we're going to leave you with anything, then the meaningful, memorable, and manageable kind of framework is something that we'd love you to take away. Hopefully, with this session as well, we've given you something meaningful. It's giving you some tangible next steps you can take back to your organization. Hopefully, it's been memorable as well. Some memorable insights that are going to adjust the way you think about privacy, that you think about measurement, and hopefully it's been a bit manageable in terms of we've not been too tech heavy. Maybe a few new terms to kind of go and research and look into, and happy to answer some questions around them. But hopefully trying to approach this in a manageable way, so that it's something that you can really think about how to approach overall. So thanks for being with us so far, and we're going to hand it over to any questions that you have. So please feel free to type into the question box. I think we'll start with one from Faye Cooper. Can you give examples of brands who have provided customers with an exceptional privacy experience when arriving at a website? That's definitely one for you, Adam, on that one.
So on this one, naturally, I work for Google. I'm a Google consumer. I would say go through that experience if you're a Google user. Go and log on to My Settings. When you sign into your Google account, what options you have. I think that's quite an interesting kind of base and place for you to start. But then when we really talk about how to almost do a privacy analysis, so I always think about doing it. Well, firstly, let's do peer set. So let's go to your competitors. Let's go to the businesses that operate in the same field as you. Go through a journey, go through maybe not a conversion journey, but go through a journey where you're on their website, you're experiencing what their customers experience, and note down some of the nuances and some of the kind of the ways that they approach it. Then go to almost the kind of the tech pure plays, right? The digital natives, the brands that are entirely based on structured data and have been built in this age. You'll see that they approach it in a really interesting way because they're aware of the value of that data. And they'll really try and try interesting A/B tests and different ways in which they can engage with consumers on that. So that's an area to look at. So think here the aggregators, the booking engines, those types of sites that kind of offer that experience. And then the last one is almost the kind of the big heritage brands, the brands that are, if they are kind of seen to be not providing that type of experience to a user or not abiding by certain types of kind of regulation, whatever it might be, the interesting approach that they would take, given their scale, given their size, and given their kind of perception in market. I think you can get a really good insight there from those three different groups on how you can position perhaps your brand. So I'm not going to give any names specifically, but I'll let you go away and find your way through that mix, and interested to see what you find.
Oh, great. Thanks, Adam. Maybe next question from William is, while we're talking a lot about direct response techniques, what's the impact on brand marketing? Where does this sit in the measurement strategy? And I think this is really, actually, this is where there's a really powerful opportunity, especially for advertisers that have been very focused on really steering direct response and attribution only, because a lot of those brand kind of the brand marketing, or the longer term, the stuff that is designed to have a longer term effect or drive awareness or consideration, are exactly those channels. They're kind of undervalued when it comes to attribution, and it's good for steering tactical kind of reactivity of what drives conversion right now. But when you bring in a framework like Ekimetrics, and you actually understand the interconnected nature of how some of those brand activities actually drive efficiency of more conversion driving channels, you really start to see the interplay between the longer term activities and the shorter term activities, and how you could really steer towards that sustainable marketing plan versus something where you're constantly having to just drive short-term results overall. And so that's something that this kind of triangulation of approaches can really come into play. It does require new thinking, right? If you've only been focused on one type of approach in the past, it does require a bit of work in terms of the organization to think about the decision-making moments through a calendar year, like when you're using which technique for what type of decisions, and ultimately how you think about then setting up the kind of plan for the next year and the strategic priorities that you have by using the triangulation of all three of those. But ultimately, that's one of the ways that we're really working with our clients to think about the really valuing the role that brand marketing and kind of longer term effects actually have within driving performance as well. I think another question for you, Adam, from Stefan, is what is Google's solution to Europe's data privacy restrictions making Google Analytics not compliant, i.e. data being transferred to the US?
That's very a nice easy one there, Stefan. Thank you. Look, I appreciate the kind of the question, and also that there's a concern around the market, right, where this year has been pretty difficult from a Google Analytics perspective. I think there's been a number of decisions based on the Universal Analytics product that, or GA360, depending upon your way of your terminology, in relation to certain components, the data that it collects, and then the infrastructure behind in which it's transferred outside of the EU. There's numerous research and documents that you can read, no doubt, from the data protection authorities, but I think from Google's side, we've always felt like we go above and beyond when it comes to the technical and the kind of organizational safeguards to protect that data as it transfers. Legally, we've always kind of made sure that our products and services are signed up to the latest by way of kind of contractual clauses or privacy shield, whatever it was at the time. We've always adapted our business to be at the forefront of that, and we'll do so as and when this new executive order really does build out. But I think the final point that I'd kind of say here is that we are talking exclusively about the Universal Analytics product, and you no doubt will have seen that our plan is to migrate to Google Analytics 4, which is a completely new product built from the ground up, of which one of the primary drivers of that was not just kind of the bringing together app and web, but it was bringing together a tighter view on privacy control. So things that happen in that product, like the redaction completely of European IP addresses, for example, ultimately do go some way to solve some of the DPA concerns. I don't know whether we'll ever get the rubber stamp. I don't know if any tech company will ever get the rubber stamp when it comes to that, but all we can do is keep providing the detailed technical infrastructure, documentation, and engaging with the data protection authorities, which is what we plan to do. And we really do believe that, particularly when this political solution reaches its conclusion, that hopefully we'll be able to put a lot of this in the past.
definitely not an easy question as well, especially as regulation keeps kind of coming in and changing. But it's the reactivity that all the players in the space are taking to make sure that everything's moving forward positively is really good to see. And we've got another question from Arlem. As MMM is based on historical data, how will you be able to provide real-time analytics and decisions or leverage real-time insights as part of the MMM project? So really interesting question, because this comes down into how you think about triangulating the methods together. One first solution is how you increase the cadence of your econometric solution overall, and a lot of that comes through data automation or the access to data. The more you're online, the easier that is, because that's just where data's more readily and easily available. But taking the time to work with any media agency partners that you have, or direct buys that you take from different offline platforms, for example, and making sure that you're integrating that into like a robust and secure data pipeline is one of the ways that you can start going from something that takes a long time to set up to something where you're doing that. The QSR business that we talked about monthly was enough for them to think about really the econometric or MMM backbone to the solution. But then the integration of the attribution results within that, and actually layering that through a unified measurement approach that brings together econometrics with attribution, allows you to start really steering from a very detailed campaign granularity perspective, and actually making decisions as you're live, because you've already explored the connections between some of your brand or offline media and how that drives online efficiency. And then you can steer the very detailed and tactical online results in a live way as you go forwards. But always happy to talk more on that one. I think we probably have time for one more question before we close, and I know there's a few people that have some other questions as well. But I think one of the questions we had is around some of the skill sets that are necessary for brands and advertisers to kind of actually navigate through this space over the next few years. Like what needs to change in their teams.
I think yourself, Matt, you'll be able to touch perhaps more on the the data science side and the kind of the skill sets that are required there. But I think what we're seeing more and more is that our audience that we speak to is kind of rooted in marketing, but then has these kind of tentacles out to different parts of the business that we've probably not engaged with that much in the past. So I'm thinking here compliance teams, legal teams, data privacy teams, and data security teams that ultimately speak a different language to marketing. So we're really seeing that businesses that are able to, or a marketing individual, for example, who's able to kind of almost act as that horizontal and create a bit of a steering code here with a really solid and kind of forceful marketing voice, is able to actually drive quite a lot of significant change. So, we are, by nature, our industry is quite complex, and this does add another layer to it. But if you think about privacy being kind of a core competence rather than a specialist skill, I think that will actually change the way that you think about both hiring and career development. And I'm sure you can build on that from the data science and measurement side, because there's certainly things that are required.
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. I mean, one of I think we touched already on some of the role that data engineering, data architecture profiles start to have in actually getting you ready access, smooth access, and granular and automated and real-time access to some data. So I won't go over that one so much again, but especially as you start having very rapid cadence models, the type of skill set shifts more away from like dedicated statistics or econometrics profiles and a bit more into ML engineering or ML ops as a whole kind of stream of making sure that models are actually robust over time, how you steer the automated kind of calibration of models at scale and in a very rapid way. So for sure, very new skill sets coming into the measurement space, and that's where there's a lot of innovation and a lot of innovation in the measurement space at the moment as well, not just within the kind of ad tech and the privacy landscape. It's all kind of coming into innovation within the whole space. I'm pretty sure that that's all the time we've got in terms of the hour-long session that we had this morning. I know there are a few questions that we haven't had time to answer, so please feel free to connect with either of us. Red pretty easy to find on LinkedIn as well if you wanna send us a question there. But thank you so much for joining us for the session today, and enjoy the rest of your day or your evening if you're joining us from APAC as well. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.